So, in our previous notes, we discussed the process of photosynthesis, and today we're going to discuss the process of cellular respiration. So, cellular respiration, you might think of the word respiration when you think about breathing. But the process of cellular respiration and breathing are very different. Here is a diagram, though, that connects those ideas, right? And we see the exchange mainly of these two gases, which are oxygen, which is O2, and carbon dioxide, which is CO2. And we're going to talk more about this idea of cellular respiration. So, who does cellular respiration? Well, all living things. So, all living things do cellular respiration. All plants, all animals, all eukaryotic and prokaryotic organisms all participate in cellular respiration. So, all living things. That's really, really important. The thing that is different, though, is where these processes occur. And we're going to really only focus about how this happens in eukaryotic organisms. And in eukaryotic organisms, this process of cellular respiration happens in the mighty mitochondria. And we know the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. And we're going to learn more about why we call it that. In prokaryotic cells, this process happens in the cytoplasm. So this isn't written in your notes right on the screen, but I would like you to add it for me real quickly. In prokaryotic cells, whoops, let me actually be able to write. That would be super great. Alrighty, I figured it out. What I would like you to add is that prokaryotic cells, this process takes place in the cytoplasm. And we know that it can't take place in the mitochondria in prokaryotic cells because prokaryotic cells do not have organelles in the same way that eukaryotic cells do, and they do not have mitochondria. So what is this process of cellular respiration? What is the goal? What's the whole deal? And the whole deal is that cellular respiration helps provide energy. So it's this breakdown of glucose to produce energy, ATP, and water for the cell. Now, this word ATP, you should be looking at it and thinking, wow, we learned briefly about ATP when we talked about active transport. And do you remember when we talked about active transport? We said that in active transport, energy was required, and we said that that energy was in the form of ATP. And here in this lesson, we're going to learn how do our bodies make that ATP that we need, not only for active transport in cell transport, but in so many other aspects of our body in order for cells to be successful. So here is our equation for cellular respiration. Just like our equation for photosynthesis, you are going to be required to memorize it. Here we have our sugar that is in the form of glucose, of course. And we have sugar or glucose and oxygen combining together. Those are our reactants, and it forms products. And those three products are carbon dioxide, water, and of course, this usable energy, which is so important. There are two types of cellular respiration. There's aerobic, which means with oxygen, and anaerobic, which means without oxygen. So you do need to know these two terms. You need to know that in cellular respiration, when cells have access to oxygen, that is aerobic, and when cells do not have access to oxygen, that is anaerobic. And like we've said, ATP is this awesome molecule that contains the energy that our bodies need. So this molecule is so important, and this is why cellular respiration occurs in order to produce this molecule, which we need for so many of our cell processes. So when oxygen is not present, remember we call that anaerobic. And we're going to talk about anaerobic respiration first. And when oxygen is not present, a process called fermentation occurs. And without oxygen, we only make 2 ATPs. So this entire process would only make 2 ATPs. And there are two types. There's lactic acid fermentation, and this occurs in animals. And there's also alcoholic fermentation, and this occurs in plants and fungi. And we're going to talk more about what these mean and what they look like. So lactic acid fermentation, like we said, occurs in animals, and it occurs when oxygen gas cannot get to your cells quickly enough. So this happens when you're working out really hard, and it causes muscle pain and muscle cramps. So if you've ever been working out really hard and you're like, your muscles are starting to get painful, it is because there is this production of this lactic acid, because as your body is going through cellular respiration, in order to produce energy for your muscles to move, it doesn't have enough oxygen, right? Not enough oxygen can get to all of the parts of your body, and so therefore it causes this pain when you're working out. So you can see these runners right here stretching out their legs to help get rid of a little bit of that pain. And like I said, this process isn't so great. We only produce 2 ATPs. Next, we're going to talk about alcohol fermentation or alcoholic fermentation. And like I said before, it occurs in plants and fungi. Specifically, you'll think about it a lot with yeast. And this is the process that makes beer, wine, and bread. So when we use yeast, like we use yeast with bread and beer and some wines, this process is what actually causes those processes to work. So that glucose is broken down into carbon dioxide and ethanol. And so that ethanol byproduct is what is so important for us to be able to make these beers, wines, and breads that we use. So we talked about what happens when oxygen is not present. And we said that wasn't a super efficient process because we only made 2 ATPs. And gosh, you guys should know we're going to need a lot more than 2 ATPs per chemical reaction to keep our bodies moving. There's just so much happening. If oxygen is present though, remember we call this aerobic. And this process is much more efficient. And it has oxygen gas. So oxygen gas is able to get to this chemical reaction, and instead of producing only 2 ATPs, it produces about 36. And this is much more efficient. So if you had the choice between having your body produce energy in an anaerobic versus aerobic situation or process of cellular respiration, remember anaerobic produces 2 ATPs and aerobic produces 36. You would always choose that you would want your body to be able to do cellular respiration in this presence of oxygen so that you could produce more ATP. So it's way more efficient. So from this brief video, you should know who does cellular respiration. You should know where cellular respiration occurs. You should know what happens. And you should also know the difference between aerobic and anaerobic cellular respiration. So hopefully you've learned those things from this video, and we're going to review and talk more about it in class.